The planet Horizon 4 was quiet, peaceful, and far from the conflicts of the galaxy. It was a small human colony, home to farmers, miners, and traders. The settlers had come here to escape the chaos of the Terran Confederacy's wars. But one day, everything changed. It began when the sky split open. A bright silver light tore through the atmosphere. A small ship, sleek and unlike anything human made, fell from the sky, crashing deep into the forest beyond the colony. At first, the people thought it was just another meteor. But when the first team of scouts went to investigate, they never came back. Days passed. More people went into the forest. None returned. Fears spread through the colony like wildfire. Whispers filled the air. Some believed it was a monster from another world, something that hunted in the shadows. Others thought it was a machine, a new alien technology far beyond human understanding. Then she walked into town. A woman, tall and elegant, with strange glowing markings on her smooth, pale blue skin. Her silver eyes seemed to hold the weight of stars. She wore a simple, form-fitting suit, damaged from the crash. She was beautiful, but terrifying, because anyone she touched vanished into thin air. A stranger in a hostile world. The first person to approach her was Dr. Marlin, the colony's chief medic. He had always believed in peace, in communication. He raised his hands to show he meant no harm. The alien woman looked at him with curiosity, almost as if she didn't understand why they feared her. She reached out, barely brushing his arm. And in an instant, he was gone. The crowd screamed. People ran, hiding inside buildings, locking their doors. The colony's guards aimed their weapons, but no one dared fire. What if shooting her made things worse? The woman didn't chase them. She didn't attack. Instead, she looked around, confused. A strange sadness crossed her face, as if she hadn't meant to do it. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the forest, disappearing into the trees. But the terror remained. For the next 3 days, no one dared go near the forest. Some people wanted to leave Horizon 4 entirely. Others wanted to send a distress signal to the Terran Expeditionary Corps, hoping for military help. After much debate, they sent the message. The man who didn't disappear. 3 weeks later, the Terran warship Ironclad arrived in orbit. Leading the team sent to the colony was Captain Elias Voss, a veteran of the frontier wars. He was known for 2 things: his sharp instincts and his refusal to back down from a mystery. The colonists begged him to eliminate the alien woman. "She's dangerous," they said. "She isn't human." Voss listened, but he wasn't convinced. Something about their fear didn't make sense. If this woman was truly a threat, why hadn't she attacked the colony? Why did she seem sad when people disappeared? So, against the warnings, Voss went into the forest alone. The air was thick with mist. The trees swayed as if whispering secrets. There was no sound of animals, no sign of life, except her. She stood by a small river, gazing into the water, her silver eyes distant. Her skin shimmered under the dim light of the twin moons. Voss stepped forward. "Are you alone?" She turned sharply. Her body tensed, ready to react. She had probably expected a fight, another terrified human with a weapon. Voss raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "You understand me." She hesitated. Then, slowly, she nodded. "What's your name?" he asked. She stared at him for a long moment before speaking. Her voice was soft, almost musical. "Scifi." Voss took another step. "You've scared a lot of people." A shadow crossed her face. "I did not mean to." Then what happened? Scifi lifted her hand, staring at it as if it betrayed her. "When I touch them, they vanish." "Where do they go?" She shook her head. "I do not know." Her voice wavered, as if the truth frightened even her. "I never meant to hurt them. I just wanted help." Voss could tell she was telling the truth, or at least she believed she was. "Then let's find out together." Before she could react, he reached out and touched her hand. For the first time, nothing happened. Silari's silver eyes widened in shock. She pulled her hand back, staring at him as if he were something impossible. You did not disappear. Voss smirked. Guess I'm just lucky. For the first time, Silari smiled. A small, uncertain smile. But behind it, there was something else. Hope. Somewhere in the universe, her kind had vanished. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. And neither was he. Silari stared at Elias Voss, her silver eyes wide with shock. You did not disappear, she whispered. Voss looked at his own hands, half expecting them to fade into nothingness. But he was still there, standing in the cold forest under the twin moons of Horizon 4. He gave a small smirk. Looks like I'm different. Silari's fingers curled as if she was afraid to touch him again. No one has ever survived my touch. Well, I'm not like most people, Voss said, stepping back to give her space. He had dealt with many strange things in his life. Alien ruins, rogue AI, even space pirates. But this was something new. A woman who made people disappear with a touch, yet had no idea how or why. Where do they go? He asked. Silari lowered her gaze. I do not know. You never tried to bring them back. Her body stiffened. I cannot. There was something in her voice. Pain, regret, fear. She was telling the truth. She wasn't a killer. She wasn't a monster. She was lost. Voss studied her for a moment. Her suit was torn, signs of a crash. Her hair, long and smooth, moved slightly in the cold wind. If she was dangerous, it wasn't by choice. But that didn't change the fact that she had made 8 colonists disappear. The weight of fear. The colony wasn't going to accept this easily. He knew that much. Come with me, he said. Silari took a step back, uncertainty flashing in her silver eyes. Where? To the colony. We need answers, and people need to see that you're not here to hurt them. She shook her head. They fear me. If I go back, they will try to kill me. She wasn't wrong. Voss had seen the panic, the fear, the hatred in the colonists' eyes. They'd wanted her gone. And if he hadn't come, they would have taken matters into their own hands. Then what do you want to do? He asked. Silari hesitated. She looked around the dark forest as if expecting something to appear from the shadows. I need to fix this. I need to understand what happened to them. But I do not know how. Voss nodded. Then let's figure it out together. Her eyes searched his face, looking for signs of deception, of hidden intentions. She would find none. Finally, she exhaled. All right. The walk into danger. They walked toward the colony together. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Voss noticed small details about her. The way her fingers twitched slightly as if unused to being still. The way her glowing skin dimmed when she was sad. And the way she glanced at him every few minutes, as if still surprised he was walking beside her. After a long walk, the colony walls came into view. As soon as they stepped into the open, alarms rang out. She's back, someone shouted. Guards appeared on the walls, rifles aimed directly at Silari. Colonists ran inside, slamming doors shut. The fear in the air was thick. Voss raised a hand. Stand down. Commander Reese Carter, leader of the colony's security forces, marched forward. Captain, get away from her. You have no idea what she's capable of. Voss stood his ground. I know exactly what she's capable of. She doesn't want to hurt anyone. Tell that to the people she erased. Carter snapped. His hand hovered over his sidearm, ready to fire. If you won't stop this, I will. Silari stiffened beside Voss. She wasn't afraid, but she was ready. He could see it in the way her stance shifted, how her muscles tensed. If they fired at her, she wouldn't run. And if she touched them, they'd disappear. Voss exhaled. He had one shot at this. Listen to me, he said, voice firm. We don't know what happened to those people. But Silari. He gestured toward her. She doesn't know either. She never meant for this to happen, and she wants to fix it. A murmur spread through the crowd. Not everyone was convinced, but some hesitated. Some wanted to believe. Carter gritted his teeth. And if she can't fix it, then what? Voss met his gaze. Then we find another way. The tension was thick. No one moved. The guards kept their weapons ready. Scifi didn't take her eyes off them. Finally, Carter sighed. You're putting a lot of faith in something you don't understand. That's my job, Voss replied. Another long silence. Then, Carter lowered his hand. Fine, but she stays under watch. Voss nodded. Fair enough. The guards didn't lower their weapons completely, but they didn't fire either. That was enough for now. The path to truth. Scifi stood beside him as they walked into the colony, her expression unreadable. They still fear me, she said quietly. Fear takes time to fade, Voss replied. She looked at him again, silver eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. And you? Do you fear me? He thought for a moment before answering. No, he said simply. I don't. And for the first time since she arrived, Scifi smiled. Scifi walked through the human colony beside Captain Elias Voss, her silver eyes scanning everything. The people, the buildings, the way the humans looked at her with a mix of fear and hatred. It was the same everywhere. People whispered. Parents pulled their children inside. Guards followed her every step, their hands close to their weapons. She could feel their fear like a thick cloud around her. She did not blame them. She had touched 8 people, and they had disappeared. She could not explain it. She could not bring them back. And yet Voss was different. Scifi glanced at him. He walked beside her without fear, without hesitation. He was the only one who had touched her and remained. The only one who wanted to help. But why? The search for answers. Voss led her into a small lab near the colony center. It was quiet, away from the crowd. The doors locked behind them with a soft hiss. A single scientist stood inside, a woman named Dr. Elara Finch. She adjusted her glasses, her sharp eyes studying Scifi. Voss, this is insane. Finch said, we should be figuring out how to contain her, not. We're not containing anyone, Voss interrupted. We're finding answers. Finch sighed but nodded. Fine. Let's start with the basics. She pointed at a medical scanner. Sit there. Scifi hesitated. What is this? It's just a scan, Voss said. No pain, I promise. She looked at him, then at Finch, then finally sat on the machine. The lights flickered as it activated, scanning her body with a soft hum. Something more than alien. Finch studied the results. Her expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, and then to shock. This isn't possible, she muttered. Voss frowned. What? Finch turned the screen toward them. Her cells. They aren't normal. Scifi glanced at the screen. Strange symbols and graphs filled it, but she did not understand. Explain. Finch took a deep breath. Your body isn't just biological. It's something more. It's like your cells exist in 2 places at once. Scifi's heart skipped a beat. 2 places. Finch nodded. Some part of you isn't fully here. It's phasing between dimensions. Voss's eyes widened slightly. That explains why people vanish when she touches them. Finch ran a hand through her hair. It's like she's half in this world and half in another. And when she touches someone, it pulls them into the other side. Scifi's hands clenched. Then they are not dead. Finch hesitated. I don't know. But if we can figure out how to reverse it, we might be able to bring them back. Hope flickered in Scifi's chest. She could fix this. But then, a sudden alarm blared through the colony. The shadows that hunt. Voss's communicator beeped. Captain. It was Carter's voice. Get to the south gate. Now. We have incoming hostiles. Voss's expression turned serious. He turned to Scifi. Stay here. She shook her head. No, if this is because of me, I need to know. Voss hesitated but then nodded. Together, they ran toward the colony's southern wall. When they arrived, a dark ship hovered just beyond the colony's defenses. It was not human. The design was sleek and smooth, black as the void, with faint green energy glowing along its sides. The ship made no sound, but its presence sent a shiver through the air. "Who are they?" Voss asked. Silari's breath caught in her throat. She knew this ship. She had seen it before. "They are my enemy," she whispered. The ship's communication screen flickered on. A tall alien figure appeared, his skin dark and marked with glowing red lines. His eyes were pure black, filled with nothing but cold purpose. "Silari." The alien spoke. His voice was deep, smooth, and emotionless. "You cannot run forever." Voss's jaw tightened. Who the hell is this? Silari's hands trembled. "They are called the Valeth. They destroyed my people." Voss frowned. "And now they're here for you." "Yes." The Valeth leader tilted his head. "You are the last, Silari. Surrender. We will take you back." Silari's heart pounded. She knew what take you back meant. Death. She clenched her fists. "No." The Valeth's dark eyes narrowed. "Then you will die like the rest of your kind." The transmission cut. The ship powered up its weapons. "The battle begins. Everyone, take positions," Carter shouted. The colony's defenses hummed to life. Turrets turned, energy shields activated, soldiers took their places. Voss turned to Silari. "Can you fight?" She met his gaze. "Yes." "Good," he said, "because we're not letting them take you." The sky above crackled with energy as the first shots fired. The battle for Silari's life and the colony's survival had begun. The colony's alarms blared through the air as the Valeth warship hovered just beyond the outer defenses. The sky glowed with the energy of charging weapons, and a tense silence filled the space before the inevitable storm. Captain Elias Voss stood on the defensive wall, gripping his rifle as he watched the enemy ship. Silari stood beside him, her silver eyes locked onto the dark vessel. "They came for me," she whispered. Voss glanced at her. Then they made a mistake. Below them, Commander Carter barked orders. Soldiers rushed to defensive positions. Turrets powered up. Energy shields hummed to life. And snipers took aim. The Valeth were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they had Silari. First strike. Without warning, the Valeth ship fired. A bolt of green energy streaked toward the colony, smashing into the outer shield. The barrier flashed bright blue, absorbing the attack, but the force sent a shockwave through the ground, shaking the walls. "Shields holding," Carter reported, his voice tense. "But not for long." Voss raised his rifle. "Then we hit them back. Open fire." The colony's turrets roared to life, unleashing a rain of bullets and plasma toward the Valeth vessel. Some shots bounced off its sleek black hull, but others hit weak points, sending sparks across its surface. The Valeth retaliated. Drones emerged from the ship, sleek, fast-moving machines that dodged through the air like deadly insects. "Take out those drones," Carter shouted. The colony's soldiers fired, filling the sky with blazing streaks of light. Explosions lit up the battlefield as drones were torn apart, but more kept coming. Silari clenched her fists. She knew this enemy. The Valeth never stopped. They would keep coming until the colony was nothing but ash. Unless she did something. The power within. Voss saw her tense. "What are you thinking?" "They are here because of me," she said. "I cannot let them destroy your people." Voss frowned. "And what are you gonna do?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a deep breath and leaped off the wall. "Wait!" Voss shouted, reaching for her, but she was already in motion. She landed gracefully in the battlefield below, her glowing hands pulsing with strange energy. The Valeth drones turned toward her. They recognized her power. They attacked. Green laser fire rained down, but Scifi moved like a shadow. She twisted and dodged, avoiding every shot with unnatural speed. Then, she reached out, touching the first drone. It vanished. Voss's eyes widened. She erased it. Another drone fired at her, but she touched it too, and it disappeared instantly. One by one, the enemy machines fell, erased from existence by her mysterious power. A dangerous gamble. Voss turned to Finch, who had arrived at the wall. What's happening? Finch stared at the battlefield, analyzing Scifi's actions. It's her cells. They exist in two places at once. She's sending them somewhere else. Where? Finch hesitated. I don't know. That was the problem. No one knew what happened to those she touched. Not the colonists, not the drones, not even Scifi herself. And yet she fought like it was the only way. The enemy captain moves. Suddenly, the Valith warship shifted. Its cannons stopped firing. Instead, the ship's front opened, and a tall, dark figure emerged. The Valith captain. He floated down from the ship, landing gracefully on the battlefield. His black armor pulsed with red energy, and his cold, lifeless eyes locked onto Scifi. Scifi, he said, you cannot escape. Scifi's breath caught in her throat. She knew him. Valak, she whispered. Voss frowned. You know this guy. Scifi's hands trembled. He was the one who destroyed my people. Valak's expression did not change. You are the last of your kind, and you are dangerous. Come with me, or this colony will burn. Scifi stepped forward, her hands glowing. No. The Valith captain did not hesitate. He raised his arm. A pulse of red energy shot from his palm, hitting Scifi directly in the chest. She collapsed. Voss's heart pounded. No. He leaped over the wall, rolling onto the battlefield. Gunfire erupted around him, but he didn't care. He ran straight toward Scifi, reaching her side. She was breathing, but barely. The glow on her skin flickered, weak and fading. Valak watched them, his cold voice emotionless. You are nothing to me, human. Step aside. Voss stood up, rifle in hand. He glared at the alien warrior. You think I'm nothing, he said, voice steady. Then let's see what happens when a nothing stands in your way. Valak tilted his head. Interesting. The battle had just become personal, and Voss wasn't backing down. The battlefield was silent for a moment. Voss stood firm, gripping his rifle. His heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't back down. The Valith captain, Valak, stared at him with cold, unreadable eyes. Behind him, his warship hovered, its dark surface glowing with deadly red energy. On the ground, Scifi lay unconscious, her silver skin flickering with weak light. Voss tightened his grip. She was still alive. But she wouldn't be for long if he didn't stop Valak. You're just a human, Valak said, his voice calm, almost bored. Step aside. You cannot win this fight. Voss exhaled slowly. Maybe not. Then he opened fire. A human's defiance. Voss's rifle roared, sending plasma rounds streaking toward Valak. Each shot was precise, aimed for the alien's head and chest. But Valak didn't move. Instead, a red energy field flickered around him, absorbing every bullet like a shield. Predictable, Valak muttered. Then, with a simple motion, he raised his hand. And a blast of red energy exploded toward Voss. Voss barely had time to react. He dove to the side, rolling across the dusty battlefield as the blast scorched the ground where he had stood. The heat burned against his skin, but he pushed forward. Keep moving. Keep fighting. He switched his rifle's mode. Explosive rounds. He fired again. This time, the bullets detonated on impact, forcing Valak to step back as flames and smoke filled the air. Voss didn't stop. He charged forward, switching to his combat knife. He had no illusions. He couldn't overpower Valak, but he wasn't trying to. He just needed to buy time. The will to fight. Valak swung his arm, and another pulse of red energy streaked toward Voss. But this time, Voss was ready. He dodged low, the energy missing him by inches. He felt the heat on his back, but he kept moving. Then he was close enough. With all his strength, Voss plunged his knife toward Valak's chest. The blade met resistance. Valak's armor cracked slightly, but it didn't pierce deep. For the first time, Valak's expression changed. Surprise. Voss gritted his teeth. Didn't see that coming, did you? Valak grabbed Voss by the throat with inhuman speed. Before Voss could react, he was lifted into the air, his feet dangling above the ground. You are persistent, Valak said, his grip tightening. But pointless. Voss struggled. His vision blurred. Air was running out. His knife slipped from his fingers. Is this it? He thought. Is this how it ends? Then, a hand touched Valak's arm, and he froze. Scifi awakens. Valak's entire body stiffened. His eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat. Because the hand belonged to Scifi. She had woken up, and she had touched him. No, Valak whispered. His voice, always calm, now held something new. Fear. A strange glow spread across his body, flickering red and silver. His form began to distort, as if something was pulling him away. Voss dropped to the ground, gasping for air. He looked up in shock. Scifi's eyes were glowing, brighter than ever before. Valak struggled, his body trembling. This is impossible. Scifi's voice was calm but firm. You destroyed my people. You hunted me. You left me with nothing. Valak's form shuddered, parts of his body fading in and out of reality. But I will not let you take anyone else. She pressed her hand fully against his chest, and Valak vanished, the end of a nightmare. Silence fell over the battlefield. The Valath warship trembled, as if sensing its leader was gone. Then, without warning, it turned and fled. The dark vessel vanished into the sky, leaving the colony behind. The battle was over. Aftermath. Voss sat on the ground, breathing heavily. Scifi stood beside him, her silver skin still glowing faintly. You saved me, he said, his voice rough. Scifi knelt beside him. You saved me first. Voss gave a weak smile. Guess that makes us even. She looked at her hands, her expression unreadable. I didn't know if I could do it, if I could control it. But you did, Voss said. And you stopped him. Scifi nodded, but her eyes were troubled. I sent him. Somewhere. The same place as the others. Voss's smile faded. Do you think he's still alive? Scifi looked at the sky. I don't know. For the first time, she felt a strange hope. Maybe the people she had touched before were not gone forever. Maybe she could still bring them back. Voss pushed himself to his feet. Then I guess we have work to do. Scifi looked at him, a small smile forming on her lips. Yes, she said softly. We do. The war with the Valath was not over. But together, they had won this battle. The battle was over. The Valath warship had fled. The colony still stood. But the war was not finished. Captain Elias Voss and Scifi stood at the edge of the battlefield, looking at the sky where the enemy ship had vanished. Scifi's hands were still trembling. She had used her power again, but this time she had controlled it. Valak, the ruthless Valath leader, was gone. She had touched him, and just like before, he had disappeared. But where? That was the question that haunted her. Voss noticed her troubled expression. You okay? Scifi exhaled slowly. I sent him away, but I don't know where. Voss crossed his arms. You've never known, have you? She shook her head. I only know that. They go somewhere. Not dead. Not destroyed. Just gone. Voss's mind raced. If Valak was still alive, then maybe the others she had touched were still alive too. And that meant there was a chance to bring them back. A new mission. That night, the colony celebrated their victory. The people cheered, soldiers shared drinks, and for the first time in a long while, there was hope. But Voss and Silari didn't join the celebrations. They had work to do. Inside the colony's research lab, Dr. Finch examined Silari's genetic data. A holographic projection of her DNA floated in the air, glowing and shifting in strange patterns. "This ability of yours," Finch murmured, fascinated. "It defies everything we know about physics. It's like a doorway to another dimension." Voss leaned against the table. "Can we track where she sends them?" Finch hesitated. "That's the problem. There's no record of where they go. No signals. No energy traces." Silari's voice was quiet. "But what if we can find a way to follow them?" Voss and Finch stared at her. "You mean, use your power on yourself?" Finch asked. Silari nodded. "If I can send others away, maybe I can send myself." Voss frowned. "And if you can't come back?" Silari met his gaze. "Then at least we'll know what happens to them." Voss sighed. He didn't like this plan. It was risky, dangerous, maybe even suicidal. But it was the only way to get answers. Into the unknown. The next morning, the three of them stood outside the colony in a secure testing area. Voss had his rifle ready. He didn't know why. There was nothing to shoot at, but it made him feel better. Finch set up a scanner device to record whatever happened. Silari took a deep breath. "I'll try to control it this time." Voss nodded. "We'll be here if something goes wrong." She closed her eyes. Silver light shimmered around her skin. Her hands glowed with energy. Then, she touched her own arm. For a split second, nothing happened. Then her body flickered. Voss's heart pounded. Silari. She opened her eyes, and they were glowing brighter than ever. Then, in a flash of silver light, she was gone. A strange new world. Silari felt like she was falling through nothing. There was no ground, no air, no sky, just a vast, empty void. But then, slowly, shapes began to appear. Then, without warning, it turned and fled. The dark vessel vanished into the sky, leaving the colony behind. The battle was over. Aftermath. Voss sat on the ground, breathing heavily. Silari stood beside him, her silver skin still glowing faintly. "You saved me," he said, his voice rough. Silari knelt beside him. "You saved me first." Voss gave a weak smile. "Guess that makes us even." She looked at her hands, her expression unreadable. "I didn't know if I could do it, if I could control it." "But you did," Voss said. "And you stopped him." Silari nodded, but her eyes were troubled. "I sent him. Somewhere. The same place as the others." Voss's smile faded. "Do you think he's still alive?" Silari looked at the sky. "I don't know." For the first time, she felt a strange hope. Maybe the people she had touched before were not gone forever. Maybe she could still bring them back. Voss pushed himself to his feet. "Then I guess we have work to do." Silari looked at him, a small smile forming on her lips. "Yes," she said softly. "We do." The war with the Valith was not over. But together, they had won this battle. The battle was over. The Valith warship had fled. The colony still stood. But the war was not finished. Captain Elias Voss and Silari stood at the edge of the battlefield, looking at the sky where the enemy ship had vanished. Silari's hands were still trembling. She had used her power again, but this time she had controlled it. Valak, the ruthless Valith leader, was gone. She had touched him, and just like before, he had disappeared. But where? That was the question that haunted her. Voss noticed her troubled expression. "You okay?" Silari exhaled slowly. "I sent him away, but I don't know where." Voss crossed his arms. "You've never known, have you?" She shook her head. "I only know that they go somewhere. Not dead, not destroyed, just gone." Voss's mind raced. If Valak was still alive, then maybe the others she had touched were still alive too. And that meant there was a chance to bring them back. A new mission. That night, the colony celebrated their victory. The people cheered, soldiers shared drinks, and for the first time in a long while, there was hope. But Voss and Silari didn't join the celebrations. They had work to do. Inside the colony's research lab, Dr. Finch examined Silari's genetic data. A holographic projection of her DNA floated in the air, glowing and shifting in strange patterns. "This ability of yours," Finch murmured, fascinated. "It defies everything we know about physics. It's like a doorway to another dimension." Voss leaned against the table. "Can we track where she sends them?" Finch hesitated. "That's the problem. There's no record of where they go. No signals. No energy traces." Silari's voice was quiet. "But what if we can find a way to follow them?" Voss and Finch stared at her. "You mean, use your power on yourself?" Finch asked. Silari nodded. "If I can send others away, maybe I can send myself." Voss frowned. "And if you can't come back?" Silari met his gaze. "Then at least we'll know what happens to them." Voss sighed. He didn't like this plan. It was risky, dangerous, maybe even suicidal. But it was the only way to get answers into the unknown. The next morning, the three of them stood outside the colony in a secure testing area. Voss had his rifle ready. He didn't know why. There was nothing to shoot at, but it made him feel better. Finch set up a scanner device to record whatever happened. Silari took a deep breath. "I'll try to control it this time." Voss nodded. "We'll be here if something goes wrong." She closed her eyes. Silver light shimmered around her skin. Her hands glowed with energy. Then, she touched her own arm. For a split second, nothing happened. Then her body flickered. Voss's heart pounded. Silari. She opened her eyes, and they were glowing brighter than ever. Then, in a flash of silver light, she was gone. A strange new world. Silari felt like she was falling through nothing. There was no ground, no air, no sky, just a vast, empty void. But then, slowly, shapes began to appear. Buildings, towers, a city of shimmering blue light, and people. She gasped. They were here. The missing people, the ones she had touched before. They stood in the strange city, confused, lost, but alive. Then she heard a voice behind her. "You finally made it." She turned around, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Valak, but something was different. His armor was cracked. His red energy was flickering. He looked weaker, yet he still smiled. "You thought you sent me to oblivion," he said. "But this place, it is not death. It is something else." Silari's pulse quickened. "Where are we?" Valak stepped forward. A place between realities. A prison. A forgotten world. He tilted his head. "And now, you are trapped here too." Silari's heart pounded. She had found the lost ones. But now, she was one of them. Silari stood frozen, staring at Valak. The Valith leader was alive, but he wasn't the same as before. His red energy flickered, his armor was cracked, and his once powerful presence felt weaker. Behind him, a strange city stretched into the distance. It shimmered with blue light, its structures twisting in impossible angles. The sky above was not black or blue, but a swirling void of shifting colors. And most importantly, the lost people were here. Silari recognized them. Humans, Valith, other species. The ones she had accidentally sent away before. They were alive, but confused, wandering the strange city like lost souls. "You finally made it," Valak repeated, stepping closer. Silari's hands clenched into fists. "Where are we?" Valak smiled slightly. "A place between worlds. A prison of our own making." Silari's heart pounded. "Is there a way out?" Valak chuckled. "If there was, Don't you think I would have left already? Voss refuses to give up. Back in the real world, Captain Voss stared at the empty spot where Scifi had stood just moments ago. She was gone. Voss clenched his fists. His gut told him she was still alive. But where? Beside him, Dr. Finch checked his scanner. Her energy signature. It's still active, but it's somewhere I can't reach. Voss grabbed his rifle. Then we find a way to bring her back. Finch hesitated. Voss, this isn't like a battlefield. We don't even know where she went. Voss's expression darkened. Then we figure it out. We owe her that much. Finch sighed, but he didn't argue. All right, let's get to work. A dangerous alliance. Inside the forgotten world, Scifi studied her surroundings. The lost people were weak, their bodies slightly transparent, like they weren't fully real. If we don't escape soon, Valak said, we will fade into nothing. Scifi turned to him. You're saying we're dying? Valak nodded. Slowly. This place isn't meant for living beings. It's like a waiting room before complete erasure. Scifi felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't let this happen. There must be a way out, she said firmly. Valak smirked. Perhaps, but it requires something only you can do. Scifi narrowed her eyes. And what is that? Valak stepped closer. Use your power again, but this time, instead of sending someone away, bring someone back. Scifi's heart skipped a beat. Could she really do that? A desperate attempt. She looked at her hands. Her power had always been uncontrollable. She had never learned how to reverse it. But she had to try. She reached out her hand and focused. Bring them back. Her silver energy flared around her fingers. The air around her shimmered. The lost people around her suddenly paused, as if sensing something. Their transparent forms seemed to solidify just a little. It's working, Valak murmured, watching closely. Scifi gritted her teeth. She pushed harder, focusing with everything she had. Suddenly, a flash of silver light, and she was no longer alone. A familiar voice. Scifi gasped as she collapsed onto solid ground. She blinked, realizing she was back in the colony, back in the real world. She had escaped. Scifi. She looked up and saw Voss running toward her. He grabbed her shoulders, his eyes wide with shock and relief. You did it. You came back. Scifi's breath was shaky. I think I figured it out. I can bring them back. Voss's expression turned serious. Then we have work to do. The fight isn't over. Scifi wasn't the same person who had arrived at the colony days ago. She wasn't just a lost alien running from the Valeth. She was someone with the power to change everything. She had found the missing. Now she was going to bring them home. And if the Valeth tried to stop her, they would learn the hard way that humans don't back down.